But then you see him booed at that Knicks game,
That's
you
true.
know, during the national anthem as
Although
well.
he says
So,
he wasn't booed, though, right? He says that it was a pretty great reception. So I think he heard
yeah.
something quite different.
It's become a very political event for what is essentially, at the end of the day, it's a sporting event.
Hey guys, very good to see you again on what is a big week for President Trump. He'll be celebrating his birthday this weekend in pretty unique style.
Indeed, it is the 80th birthday of President Donald J. Trump, coming just a couple of weeks before the 250th birthday of America, of course, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So he's rolling a lot of that together into not quite a birthday bash, but a birthday bout at the White House, UFC Freedom 250. Byrne, do you know all about it?
I did just now before we started recording. I just came from the venue. It's not something I ever thought I would see at the White House. The claw, the metal contraption that goes over the octagon. It's about 92 feet tall, weighs 600 tons. They actually had to flatten out part of the south lawn to be able to set it in place. Yeah, it's quite a remarkable scene, controversial, but it's not something I think anyone really ever expected to see kind of towering over the White House here in DC.
Yeah, I was standing on a rooftop a week or so ago and just looking out over this structure, the octagon, as you said, and it is so massive. And sometimes, if you look at the kind of still shot of the White House that we have in our office, you see them kind of testing the lights and such. And it is truly something that I never thought we would see on the South Lawn of the White House. And this is supposed to hold around 4,000 spectators, and there'll be many more visitors coming as well. And it's for a cage fight, a UFC fight. And this is exactly what President Trump wanted for his birthday. And he's going to have what is, I think, going to be one of the hottest tickets in town, or is already one of the hottest tickets of town. A lot of people vying to be able to go to that UFC match on President Trump's birthday.
We should say as well that it's invite only. So
Yeah.
it's the president, it's people from the UFC boss, Dana White, issuing those invites, the parent company as well. But there will be a huge fan zone, or well, I say there is already a huge fan zone on the ellipse just behind the White House there. And that is free entry. You do still need a ticket, but they're hoping for large numbers of people to be crowded in there watching this bout on a big screen. And we should say at the time that we're recording anyway, there are due to be 7 fights on the card. I think only two of them title fights, though. I mean, the original plan was this would be a night full of title fights, but that has not come to pass. And it's interesting as well, I suppose, for fans of UFC, which I do not claim to have a deep knowledge of UFC fighting, but even Dana White has expressed concerns about how this is going to actually go for those matchups because it's going to be incredibly hot on Sunday night. We're
Yeah.
in the middle of really high temperatures here. It could be 32, 33 degrees Celsius. At nighttime when these bouts are on. There's a risk of thunderstorms, of course, at that time. And with that huge metal claw structure, that seems a little risky. And Dana White as well talking about the bugs and how they might interfere with the play. It's mosquito season here, of course. And he was interviewed for the Hollywood Reporter and talked about being at a dinner at the Rose Garden Club, as President Trump likes to call the Rose Garden now, a few weeks ago. And there was a sort of swarm of black flies, he said. And so he's very concerned about how that might interfere with the bouts as well. Bernd, was there any talk about any of those conditions or, what this is going to be like for the fighters?
Well, there was. I think, rain will obviously present a problem. And, when I went, it was very early in the morning. And, of course, they're not wearing a suit and tie as I was, but it was very unpleasantly humid and hot. And I did notice the flies. But I mean, the White House has been quite dismissive of all those concerns. They very much see this as an event that they've been talking about for a long time. But like I said, it is controversial. President Trump has a relationship with Dana White going back 25 years now. President Trump has stock in TKO, the parent company of the UFC, which is managed by a trust, to be clear. And there was a lawsuit about the fan zone in particular being kind of very close to the Vietnam War memorial. That was part of the lawsuit. But I really do think the Trump administration sees this as, exactly the message they want to send. It's a bit like changing the Department of Defense to the Department of War. They kind of see this warrior ethos as a very important part of their administration's message. And the UFC kind of embodies that to a certain regard. So, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of Republicans who are not necessarily fight fans, but they're very, very enthused by the prospect of the UFC coming to town.
It's part of that warrior ethos image that we're going to see on the South Lawn that has actually brought some of that criticism on the White House for hosting this event. And that is also part of that lawsuit you were mentioning, Baron, where there were two Virginia residents who were suing, saying this is an aesthetic injury to the area around the White House and for Washingtonians and local residents. And the White House has simply said, or the Department of Justice in refuting or pushing back on those arguments, have said, look, that's just your question of taste. This is going to be a great event that is indeed part of America's 250th celebration. But it does raise the question of, is the White House the right place for what is essentially a mixed martial arts fight, right? And this is something we know President Trump is a big fan of. You mentioned Dana White, Katrina, who, as we know, is a very close friend and ally of the president and has been for years and years now. And so, he was obviously very happy to have this event go forward, despite some of those conditions that you mentioned. But it's not just Democrats or other groups as well that have issued real concern about the image of having this these fights taking place really on the White House property.
And there is damage going to be caused to the lawn. I mean, part of the deal is that TKO Holdings, parent company of UFC, will be on the hook for $700,000 to repair, amend, and replace whatever is needed to do to the grass afterwards to restore it back to its former glory. So that really is a massive cost. I mean, all in, TKO Holdings have told their investors a couple of months ago that they expect this event to cost $60 million. And that they will be facing at the end of it a loss of $30 million. So it's a massively expensive event. They're doing it because they think it will, sort of create awareness for UFC, potentially bring it to a different audience. It'll be available on the Paramount Plus channel deal to watch. They're expecting big TV audiences on Sunday night, local Eastern time, as it will be, and that they're sort of doing it as a future investment in the UFC. But it also really is a future investment in the relationship with President Trump as well, isn't it? I mean, you can't look at it as any other way. Dana White said it was actually President Trump's idea, that they discussed it as far back as November 2024, just a couple of weeks after President Trump was re-elected. They were talking about this, and it was President Trump's idea to actually have a fight on the lawn of the White House, controversial or not. And I think you said to me a moment ago, it is a question of taste, UFC. I mean, if he was holding a big classical music concert, would that annoy people to the same extent?
And to be fair, there's been, many concerts at the White House. I mean, I went to concerts there during the Biden administration, for example. This is the first professional sporting event ever held at the White House. And I think part of the reason Trump is doing it is the audience that the UFC already has, which is they're overwhelmingly men and they're overwhelmingly young. And that was a big part of why he was reelected to come back to the White House. But, if you look at the poll numbers, those numbers have been slipping. I mean, the economy in particular, young men have not fared particularly well with it. So those numbers have dipped. And I think they really see this as a way to kind of reach out to those young men, let's say under 30, 35, that are UFC fans, but otherwise might feel getting kind of shortchanged. I think, it is probably not something where we're going to see the needle move a whole lot, but they're very aware of who watches the UFC and who is the average person who's going to tune into this fight or any other fight.
And just look at the reception that President Trump gets when he walks into a UFC crowd. I mean, he is widely supported among the UFC fans. And so that's something that he's going to be drawing together. But to that point of taste, I just found it interesting. I was looking at some of the reporting around the lawsuit that had been filed. And just to pick out the quote that was in the court filings, it said, once the cage fights are staged on the South Lawn and the weigh-ins are held at the Lincoln Memorial, the violation of the character and sanctity of these monumental spaces will be complete and incapable of remedy through later proceedings. And I wonder if that's part of the point that President Trump here is making, is that the sanctity and character of these monuments hasn't been accessible to average Americans in a way that maybe he thinks he's making it, especially those young men you're pointing to, Baron, that that kind of type of culture that often surrounds these memorials that might usually call for a classical music concert is not one that really reflects the type of American who has voted President Trump in office. Now, of course, that is painting with a broad brush. There are UFC fans who would also say they maybe don't like President Trump or voted Democrat. But if we're looking kind of the larger picture of things, they're trying to correct that image a bit of what type of culture is allowed at the White House and allowed in these types of spaces.
Exactly. And, you know, President Trump has also set about, hasn't he, beautifying, as he says, a lot of those public spaces around Washington, D.C., be it the reflecting pool, the monuments, getting it clean up, things getting repainted and so on. And of course, all of that, we should say, all of those places are free to access anyway to anyone. The White House obviously is a little different, but the mall, the Ellipse area, the Lincoln Memorial, the reflecting pool, gazillions of tourists do come through there.
And, you know, I think part of the reason people keep pointing out that it's also his birthday was, you know, these big events just seem to happen on his birthday. Last year was the Army 250th anniversary parade, also on his birthday. So I think that kind of messaging complication just kind of compounded on each other. But like I said, I think it's one of those things that people who are against President Trump are probably against the fight in the concept of having the fight at the White House, and those who are in favor of him are broadly in favor of it. It's just it's one of the, it's become a very political event for what is essentially, you know, at the end of the day, it's a sporting event.
He leans into that as well, doesn't he, when he says, oh, that octagon that's been erected, well, maybe we just leave it there like the Eiffel Tower and it could hang out there on the White House South Lawn, which we know is certainly not the case. It will be deconstructed after the event. But, President Trump in this time has also really been leaning into the sports side of him, hasn't he? Flexing that sports muscle. And it's something that he did really play up when he was on the campaign trail. Remember, he showed up at NFL games on Sundays to various UFC fights. And this week, we know that he showed up to Game 3 of the Knicks NBA Final Series against the San Antonio Spurs. And there was a lot of controversy around that. But he's a New Yorker, and he says that he's a lifelong fan and was invited by the team's owner. But it's interesting, as you said, Bernd, as President Trump is perhaps seeing some of those numbers slip with young men who were a big part of him re-entering office and winning the 2024 election, that he's starting to turn to these venues once again as a place where he can shore up support.
But then you see him booed at that Knicks game.
That's true.
You know, during the national anthem, he was shown on the big screen and there was booing, and there is footage circulating as well of people watching that at watch parties around New York and seeing him being booed, joining in with the boos as well.
Although he says he wasn't booed, though, right? He says that it was a pretty great reception. So I think he heard something quite different.
I think one aspect of it from the White House's perspective is, you know, I was speaking to a conservative commentator last night, and she said she kind of sees this as resetting the relationship between politics and sports after years in which, for example, you had NFL players, Colin Kaepernick, taking the knee during the national anthem, and it became a very kind of contentious political issue. Trump is taking, kind of re-embracing sports and bringing it back into politics. I mean, obviously not every sport, but certainly some sports. And they're very aware also that someone watching a sports game, there's of course overlap between people that are following politics and following sports, but there's also chunks of both those audiences that aren't necessarily following the other, and it kind of provides an opportunity to kind of span two different demographics to a certain extent. I think is interesting. And that's why we're also going to have the the IndyCar race here in Washington. I mean, I
Yes.
think that's another good example of it.
Yeah, he was at a NASCAR race last year. I think, Burns, you were on pool duty then, weren't you?
I was, yeah. We went to Daytona 500. It was great, and yeah. Actually, now that I think of it, I've been on a couple different pool trips with him to go to sporting events. I went to a UFC fight in Newark with him as well, and like you
Right.
said, his reception was incredible in Daytona as well. I think those two sports in particular, there's a lot of overlap there between the Trump's base and those two sports in particular. But I think what the White House would like to see is that expanded into to other sports as well.
Well, maybe that means the World Cup because, of course, we're going to see, well, the US hosting a number of games across the course of the World Cup, along with Mexico and Canada. And President Trump will attend some of those games. We don't have an exact schedule of that yet, but it'll be interesting to see how he engages with those games. I think it's pretty clear that he'll be at the final, and as we've seen in the past with the Club Cup that was held in the US last year, he ended up on the field with the players afterwards, and that's likely something we'll see. But it's a big moment of sports for the US as well in hosting the World Cup. And of course, there's been plenty of controversy around it, but part of President Trump's second term has been this really close friendship with the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, who gave him the inaugural FIFA Peace Prize. And we even heard President Trump say it shouldn't be soccer, it's actually football because it's the real football, which is something that doesn't go down well perhaps with that many Americans, but he's not wrong. But I think it will be interesting to see how he engages with the World Cup, simply because it is such a global sport and one where Americans don't necessarily or aren't that vested in the sport itself, of course, in hosting it and cheering along with other fans. But it really is more of a global sport than it is an American sport in terms of popularity.
Absolutely. And I can tell you, as the non-American in the conversation here, that there has been a lot of nervousness about this World Cup outside of the US. I mean, the past World Cups in Qatar and Russia were sort of dogged by controversy, people questioning whether they should be held there. We saw so much political action, didn't we, particularly in relation to Qatar. But outside of the US, there have been fans quite nervous and still nervous about, are they going to get into America? What's the visa situation like? What are they going to face at border control? We've seen people being turned away. I mean, spectacularly, the Somali referee being sent back home and not being allowed access despite having a diplomatic passport and all the correct paperwork. So there's nervousness about that. There's nervousness about, because there's three countries hosting it, right? US, Canada, and Mexico. And you have to cross borders to follow your teams. What happens if you cross a border and then you need to come back to the US and for some reason you're not let in? The other major controversy has been the ticket prices. I mean, they're astronomical compared to past tournaments. So, it'll be interesting to see like how many fans actually come and what the support is like in those fan zones and fan villages outside of the stadium. Because, it's a celebration of soccer. There are some really great actual matchups on offer as well.
I think part of the challenge for the Trump administration is that more so than any World Cup, any issues that fans have, let's say with immigration issues or visa issues coming into the US, that's going to be amplified quite a bit by social media and by the media. And it'd be curious to see whether the White House kind of leans into that as a defense of their immigration policies compared to previous administrations, or finds another way to explain those issues. I mean, it's interesting. I've spoken to a couple British citizens in the last few days that had tickets to come to games in the US but didn't get their ESTA visas in time. So now they're sitting in Scotland at the moment without the ability to come watch the game for which they paid. I mean, by contrast, I went to the World Cup in Russia as a fan, and your ticket was your visa. There was no separation between the two of them. I had a thing around my neck when I showed up in Moscow at the airport, and they let me in.
Well, I was speaking to the Republican Congressman Darren LaHood, who's on the White House task force for this World Cup and co-chairs the Congressional Caucus on Soccer. And unsurprisingly, of course, he's a supporter of President Trump and quite bullish about the U.S.'s success in hosting this World Cup. And I put all of these concerns to him about fans not being able to access games, fans not being able to get into the country, the fact that the BBC has spoken to a number of the football fan association clubs from the various participating countries who have said, look, if you're not from Germany or France, it's really difficult to get in the country, and they're seeing high visa rejection rates. And he insisted that the US issued this FIFA pass and that, it's a 2 to 3 day wait. Well, to get this visa, that is not what the BBC has been hearing from many of the fans who have not been able to move up in the line in that wait for a visa to get into the country. And, the question has been asked by some of those fans, why is the US hosting a World Cup if it's not going to welcome the fans of the participating countries? Again, the White House and Chairman LaHood of that Congressional Caucus and White House Task Force has said, no, we are being extremely welcoming. Anybody who wants to come in, we are vetting them, but our priority is to make sure this is a safe and secure World Cup. And to be able to do that, we have to make sure people are vetted. But fascinating that the US is hosting a World Cup where one of the countries playing is a country it's at war with right now, Iran. And, the Iranian players are not staying in the US, they're staying in Tijuana, Mexico, and traveling to the US for any matches. And just reminds you of how politicized some of this can get and probably will be as these games proceed.
The other point of concern I've heard from some folks as well who are in this country, so who aren't traveling here, but who might decide to gather in either the fan zones or, in bars, restaurants, community centres to watch some of the big matchups between South American or Latin American countries, is there's a real fear that ICE agents are going to turn up to some of those areas and sort of raid these gatherings, lest there be people there who don't have the correct paperwork. And we saw, didn't we, a big situation out in California as well, with workers in the stadium threatening to go on strike over that issue as well. So it's a very, obviously we know, tense time here in the US. So I'm going to be watching out to see, how many of these concerns and these tensions bubble forward during the games and how many of them are sort of put on hold to let the celebration of soccer, this global gathering, take place across the three nations. And I kind of think, I was speaking to a few international soccer coaches in the last couple of weeks, and they feel once we get into the actual business of the football and who's got the points and who's getting out of the groups and so on, that will take over the conversation and it will be less about some of these controversial issues that we're talking about now.
I tend to agree, and I kind of think the White House will very much, at least in public discourse, see this as a celebration as part of the more extended celebration of 250 in the U.S., part of having the World Cup here, and putting aside differences with other countries. I mean, the fact that Mexico and the U.S. are hosting this together when there's been such a tense relationship over economic issues in the last year, I think both governments take that as kind of a remarkable thing. Of course, the World Cup was granted before Trump returned to the White House, but I still think the White House will do as much as it can to make this into a positive headline month rather than kind of a controversy of any kind.
Definitely. And I can say, I will not be able to get to any of those World Cup matches. Not only are we busy working here in DC, but as you said, Katrina, the prices of those tickets are exorbitant at the moment. And I think that's going to be a real story throughout the World Cup, is who can actually get to these games.
At least you guys, your country is in the World Cup. Mine sadly isn't. Ireland watching from the sideline, so I'll have to pick another nation to cheer on for the next few weeks.
Mexico's good, Katrina. If you want
Mexico's good.
Germany, Colombia.
Yeah. And I'm in the US. I've got a lot of choices there to pick from. And of course, England and Scotland, we should mention.
Oh, sorry,
we
should say that. We should.
Cheer for everyone. All right, well, here's to some great soccer, football games over the next week. And I will see you guys soon.
Bye, guys.
See you then.
Bye. If you enjoyed this episode of The President's Path, then like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would love to hear from you, so please leave us a comment below or email us on path@bbc.co.uk.